people come for lots of different reasons. And some people come because they've seen it in Istanbul, or they saw it in a restaurant on holiday. And it has a sort of air of exotic East about it. Whirling dervishes, how do they do it? And when you're on the skin as a sheikh, you can see everyone in the audience, and you can see who's engaged and who's not engaged. And some people are just sort of slumped in their chairs like that, almost asleep, and others are just sort of totally in rapture with their hand on their heart all the time. So you can see exactly who it's speaking to and who it isn't. And then you've got people who come regularly because they love it. So you've got sort of regular devotees and people who come along for the first time. But as a watcher, you're known as a lover, so you're not. It's not like acting in a play. It's like you're part of the ceremony as a lover, and the love from the lovers supports you as you turn. So actually, although it might be scarier having people watching, it actually makes turning easier because you get this loving support comes over. And when you go past them, first time it might be a bit frightening, but then next time you feel this wave of love hitting you, and it supports you. So, if you're going to continue turning, don't miss guest macabre-lays. They're the best ones. They have the best vibe. And also, when we're down to just 2 macabre-lays a month, if you miss one, then you've got a whole 4 weeks without turning, and at this stage that's too long. And Gita, if you want to keep going, you've got to keep practicing on your own regular. If not, you'll lose it.
No, we'll do.
Yeah.
I'll find somewhere to do it in India.
Yeah, in India.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Today's topic, at the request of Paola, who's not here, was dying. Good. And she said she'll listen to it later. So do you want to hear about dying?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then you're dying too, Hakeem say. And then next week it's Miranda's question about the perfect drama and where does apparent free will fit in. That was your question, roughly. And I'm going to do a special diagram for it. I was trying to think how to put it in, how do I express it in a symbol, and I've come up with one. So with dying, it's an interesting thing because it's going to happen to absolutely every one of us. It's guaranteed. The only thing you don't know is exactly when it's going to happen. So like you've got a birthday, you must also have a death day, but you just don't know when it is. And in England, in Victorian times, death was very sort of out in the open, and sex, for instance, was very sort of pushed down and hidden. But now in England it's sort of gone the other way around, and sex is very out in the open, and death and dying are all sort of hidden away as much as possible. But in some cultures, death is much more out in the open, like in Tibet, for instance. All their art and their symbolism and their mythology all has images of dying, so there's lots and lots of skeletons in Tibetan mythology and art. And that's all to show, just to remind you all the time that the movie is impermanent. So at any moment the movie can suddenly end. And so in the back of your mind you have that awareness that it's an impermanent drama. And there are other cultures as well, like Mexico, who celebrate death and skeletons and things. And I've been riveted by the subject ever since I was about 9, because my father got lung cancer when I was 5, and as my mother was a nurse, she nursed him at home, So he died very slowly in the house I was living in, and then he died when I was 9, and I absolutely wanted to know what had happened and where he'd gone. And so that set up a sort of quest, really. And then I had a brush with death myself when I was about 10, when I was out in a great big storm, and this huge poplar tree, I looked up, my friend shouted, and this huge poplar tree was at about 45 degrees and coming down right on top of me. And I was on this other tree which had fallen over, and I was climbing on it, and I looked up and I just sort of fell through the branches as the other tree crashed down on the trunk of the first tree, and where I'd been standing, and everything went into slow motion, and so I sort of witnessed it quite impartially. And then I was able to pick myself up and run out unharmed. And then in about early 20s, Dr. Rolls did these amazing series of meetings on dying, because it was just at the time when someone called Raymond Moody had published some books, a book called Life After Life, and he coined the phrase a near-death experience. And up to that time, although there had been historical accounts of NDEs, there hadn't been any books about it. And Dr. Rolls did some brilliant meetings and talks on it, and using Raymond Moody's examples and linking it into his own experience. And I found that totally riveting and eye-opening, and I never forgot it. And then in the 1980s, I worked with writing papers and doing talks with someone from here who's a consultant neuropsychiatrist called Dr. Peter Fenwick, and he's a world expert and authority on near-death experience and brain function. And he'd done some television talks, programs, and some radio talks, and he'd invited people to send in their near-death experiences. And so we had this huge, great mass of them. It was amazing reading through some of them and the similarities of the experiences. And as time's gone on and resuscitation techniques have got better and better, more and more people are being resuscitated from cardiac arrests and other near-fatal injuries, and they're coming back with these amazing experiences which are all so similar. And I'd had a few other examples. I'd had several examples where very close friends had died or relatives had died, and they're amazing synchronistic events and happenings and things that had happened at exactly the time that they'd died. And I already told you last week about how when Dr. Rolls died, it was like there was this amazing, it was like a huge great release of energy. And I know in the mystical literature there's lots of examples of different saints. There's a Tibetan saint, Milarepa, and there's a whole biography about him. And it's amazing when he dies. Again, you get this huge release of energy, and it's almost like a release of knowledge as well, and it sort of goes outwards into people who love them, I think. And often it happens in quite unlikely ways, which I can't quite explain. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I had a really vivid dream that the organist from the group The Doors gave me a lesson in how to play their great classic tune Light My Fire on the organ, and he was showing me how to play it in the dream. It was so vivid, And when I woke up, I thought, what on earth was that about? It was so real. It was like I was with him. And then the next day I heard quite out of the blue that he'd died that night. And I thought that was interesting. And there have been lots of other examples of strange things. I had another really strange one, which was, again, when Dr. Earls was dying, there were lots of thunderstorms going on all around. It was just the sort of time in June when it was full of thunderstorms. And he'd talked about them a bit. And the morning after he died, I was cycling up to London, and I went through Richmond Park, and then this huge, great thunderstorm came up, and so I sheltered under a tree with my bicycle. And while the thunder was cracking away, I sort of said to Dr. Earls mentally, "Okay, Dr. Earls, let's see a miracle." And of course, nothing happened until I got to the place I was going to stay at in London, and the room I was going to sleep in had been struck by lightning exactly half an hour before, and all the plaster had been blown off the walls and was all lying on the floor. So I thought that could be coincidence, or it could be something else. But I think inside yourself, deep down, you know when it's something real and when it's just coincidence. And then there have been so many different examples. I had another time when a friend who had been in my group here, who was a really sweet lady, and she was an actress, and she'd got a brain tumour, and I'd visited her in her hospice, and I'd seen her a lot while she was dying. I used to go and visit her and have tea with her on my way up to Collet. And one day, I was living down in Dorset then, and I was in my studio, and it was one morning, it was like something just sort of blew into the room, and I thought it was her, and I started talking to her, and then I started crying, and it felt like this amazing, it was just like something blew in. And then later on I phoned the hospice, and they said she'd died that morning. So it was like a sort of visitation. The actual process of it I'll try and go into more deeply. But in the actual lead up to death, often the first thing that happens is people have an intimation that they're going to die, and that often happens 2 weeks before people die. They have this very strong feeling, and if they're in hospice or in hospital, they often tell the nurses but they won't be needing any more medication after a certain time, and it's always turns out to be correct. As death draws nearer, people start getting what the nurses call granny visitors. And the granny visitors are normally relatives of the dying person who have previously died, which come to the bedside of the dying person. And normally just the dying person can see these relatives. And just now and again, also visitors, real live human visitors, also see the visitors. But normally it's just for the person who's dying. And normally, at first, the deathbed visitors are quite far away. Sometimes they're just outside the door or outside the window. And then, as death gets nearer, they get closer and closer, till eventually the deathbed visitors are normally sitting on the bed. And when the the person's very near to death, often the deathbed visitor will tell them that they're going to come back for them to take them on their next journey at a certain time. And so again they tell the nurses, I'm going off on a journey tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and that's nearly always the time that the patient dies. And on the lead up to death, there's another phenomena which is known as the alternate reality. And it's like if a person's death is a slow process, then as death gets nearer, they'll live simultaneously in two realities. So they're both in this world, and then they go into another world, which for them is more real than this world. And when they're in the other world, they go often into amazing meadows and places by rivers and places like which they would have loved in their life. And often they see relatives who are waiting for them. And then they come back and they're back in this world. And that sort of goes on, the flipping and flopping between the two realities. And again, I remember when Mrs. Rolls was dying, and I was helping look after her, and I used to cook her meals and things. And Dr. Rolls told me how he had called her back once when she was unconscious, and she woke up and said, "Why did you call me back? It was so beautiful where I was." And then a bit later she said, "Tell them everything's all right at the end." And I've known other people. There was a caretaker who lived in Match's flat called Roy Tomlinson, and when he was dying he heard this most amazing music, and he said it was like nothing he'd ever heard before, and he said Mozart is only just the beginning. So it was like it was something way more beautiful than Mozart. And then there's another thing which is really interesting, and my mother used to tell me about this because she was a Marie Curie nurse, and Marie Curie nurses go into terminally ill people's homes just for the last few nights of life, really to nurse the patient so that the relatives can at last get a bit of rest, because normally the relatives have been up looking after their dying relative, and they desperately need some sleep. So the Marie Curie sends nurses in. And my mother told me time and time again about a thing which is known as terminal lucidity. And this happens just before someone dies, and the person can have been in a coma for a long time, or they can have had a stroke and had brain damage, or they could have Alzheimer's and not know who anyone is and have been like that for many, many years. And suddenly, just before they die, they suddenly become completely lucid, and they can talk to their relatives and thank the nurses for looking after them. So that's a great mystery which science doesn't understand at all, because a brain which is completely decayed and all the neural pathways have shut down can somehow, at the moment of death, suddenly become fully functioning and completely lucid. And my mother told me how the relatives would get all excited because they'd think the person was getting better. But my mother knew from experience that death was very close. So I always found that amazing, how an apparently diseased brain could suddenly become fully functional again, and having perhaps not spoken or forgotten who everyone was, suddenly remembers everything and is completely lucid. So I find that extraordinary.
Because it happens normally before?
It happens but just before death.
So roughly how long is typical?
Typical would be an hour or two, right at the end. So it's
in Arabic it has a name. In Arabic it has a name.
What's it called?
It's called Sahwat Maut. The waking of dying or something like that.
Yeah.
So everybody sort of says that.
That's really nice.
And it's not the one about 2 weeks. It's this one.
The one, the one.
All of a sudden they become clear.
Yeah.
They know everything, and they say, "Oh, he's gonna die."
Yeah.
It's a waking before the dying.
My brother was telling me the other day, and he's a doctor and a homeopath and a Chinese herbalist and everything else. And he was saying that just before death, all the acupuncture pulses become perfectly balanced. Whereas normally in acupuncture, the whole object of the exercise is to bring your different pulses into balance. And then just before death, they all suddenly go into balance, which I found interesting.
Chinese people has the same saying, but it can be 2-3 days before.
Yeah.
And they call it reflection of the light.
Yeah.
The reflection of the spirit.
Yeah.
Just everything come back to them perfectly, and then they function well, and then tell everyone, like the money and everything, how they want to organize it.
Yeah.
And then they suddenly went into coma, and probably 1 day or 2 days they just passed away.
Yeah.
It can be any, just in between 3 days can be any time.
Yeah.
A little bit of synchronicity for me personally. Tomorrow is the 4th anniversary of my father's death.
Oh.
Yeah, so I remember thinking this is an interesting
A
segue.
synchronism.
Yeah, because everything that you're saying is very familiar in terms of the timing and so forth.
Yeah. It's amazing in the experiences, particularly some of the ones Dr. Fenwick showed me, of all the things that actually happen at the moment of death. And how even for people sort of on the other side of the world, very significant things can happen. And mechanical devices cease working, clocks stop. There have been examples of every clock in the house stopping at exactly the time the person dies, even digital clocks. And no one can explain that. And then there's another phenomena, again at the moment of death, which is an actual physical light is seen. And that happened, for instance, with George Harrison when he died, and many other examples. And that's something, so that's not the dying person seeing it, it's something that the people around witness. And sometimes the whole room will be illuminated and you'll see the light coming out of the door. So Dr. Fenwick said there needed to be, talking as a scientist, he wanted sensors set up so they could measure what exactly is this. And going on the experience of people who have come back, there's a number of sort of things that happen. They don't all happen to every single person, but enough of them happen to most people at the moment of death to be significant. And I know there's something called the Grayson scale, which is a whole list of these different phenomena that happen in a near-death experience. So you sort of, if you're being interviewed, you tick them all off on a particular list. And the most common ones are, the first one is the dying person suddenly finds himself no longer located in their physical body. So very typically they find themselves, if they're in the operating theatre, they find themselves up near the ceiling, looking down on the doctors working on them. And often it's like you have a vision which goes, it's not just confined to the room. Your vision suddenly expands greatly, so you can see your relatives sort of waiting in the waiting room. And some people are even aware of relatives who are sort of the other side of the world, who are flying to meet them on jet planes, who are coming over because they know that they're about to die. So it's like, from my perspective, when consciousness, the bottle breaks and consciousness again becomes universal, then it's no longer contained within this limited body, but it's like the analogy of a bottle in the Ganges, and the bottle breaks and consciousness suddenly goes outwards and becomes universal, and people have access to amazing knowledge which they wouldn't have otherwise. And often in the near-death experience, they come back with knowledge that they couldn't possibly have known any other way. And that's quite a useful thing, because it's very easy to say it was just all the result of the drugs or brain function, or the dying brain was randomly firing and coming up with all these patterns and things. But one of the things is people often meet deceased relatives who are waiting. The most common one to meet is your mother, apparently, if your mother's already died. But anyone you've got a very strong emotional attachment to will often be waiting there to take you along on the next part of your journey. And there was a lovely one I heard once about this little boy who was dying. And not long before he died, he had this great big white horse came along. And I think he told his mother, he said, "There's a big white horse has come to see me." And the mother said to him, "I think that when it's your time, the big white horse will come back to get you again." And then a few days later, the little boy said, "The big white horse is back and he's come to get me." And then he died. And that rather resonates with me, because I go and feed a big white horse every week. So I whispered in the big white horse's ear, "Please come and get me when it's my time."
Does that happen to people? Because you're talking now about people dying, having a peaceful death. If that.
It happens both peaceful and non-peaceful. So say you take a car accident, then, which there's many recorded examples of, and then the person finds himself out of their body above the car looking down on the resuscitation attempt. And normally the person they see their own body, but they think it's someone else. So they think, "Oh dear, there's someone who's not very well." And then normally, even in the hospital that happens, they think, "Oh dear, the person in the next bed's not doing too well." And then at a certain point they realise it's themselves. And often the next thing that happens is they find themselves going down this very dark tunnel. And I had a friend, again, he's someone who was here, he's an actor called Tony Anholt, and he was dying of a brain tumour. I used to visit him in his hospital, and at a certain point he went into a coma, and there's another actor from here who's an actor called Brian Blessed, and he's got a very big sort of boomy voice, and Tony was in the coma, and Brian Blessed went to visit him in the hospital, and Tony hadn't said goodbye to his son, and Brian Blessed boomed at him, "Come back, Tony!" And Tony was going down the dark tunnel, and he heard Brian Blessed's voice booming at this end of the tunnel, and so Tony came back, and then he regained consciousness, and he was and he was able to say goodbye to his son. Sorry? Brian was never a turner. He was. I think he did the movements. He used to come to meetings. He might come back one day. He's a big fellow with a beard. He's a very famous actor, and he played Flash Gordon, or he's in that.
He's in it.
Yeah, he's in it. He's mainly Shakespearean. And he introduced Kenneth Branagh to this place. He's another famous actor.
Is he a Turner?
He's not a turner. And I learnt to turn with Terence Stamp. He's a famous
I know
actor.
the name, but I can't think of it.
He was Priscilla,
No,
Queen
Priscilla,
of
Queen
King
of
of Bethesda.
Yes, I love that movie.
He was also in Far From the Madding Crowd, the original one. He was the dastardly Sergeant Troy. He's in lots and lots of things. He was one of my fellow chickpeas. Oh, he was in Meetings with Remarkable Men as well.
And that's Dyer.
That's Dyer. Anyway, where were we? Dark Tunnels. Yeah, with coma is very often when the person has some unfinished business and there's someone they're waiting to say goodbye to. So there's some reason where you sort of go into this intermediate state and you're not quite ready to die. So I'm told it is often, as in Tony's case, there was someone he hadn't said goodbye to. And then what happens is, at the end of a dark tunnel, you see this tiny little speck of light, and you get drawn towards the speck of light, and the light gets bigger and bigger and bigger, until it completely, absolutely envelops everything. And you feel this amazing, unconditional love coming off the light. And you just don't want to be anywhere else. And it's like this intense peace and intense happiness, and there's no sort of movement back or forward, and it's timeless. And when often during that you get what's known as a life review. And the life reviews is very common. It's so common, it's in literature and things about how drowning people see their whole life flashing before them. And with the life review, it's like you see a movie of your life at high speed, or it's like a slideshow, or it's like you see all the episodes from your life, but you see them all simultaneously, and you're seeing it from a different perspective. You're not seeing it as you saw it the first time round. You're seeing it as if you're looking at it from outside. So you see the way you treat different people, and when you've been really nice to someone, that gives you you feel the happiness you gave to someone else. And when you've been nasty to someone, you feel the unhappiness you caused them. But there's absolutely no judgment at all. The only judgment comes from you yourself watching what you've been up to. And so, as I said, there's absolutely no judgment. And all the time the being of light is just raining down this total unconditional love. And as I said, often there are deceased relatives and even pets. Pets are quite common. There was one man who had been in the Indian Army and he was dying, and a few days before he died he had this vivid dream where all the pets he'd had in his life all suddenly came in a great flock, all barking and yapping and licking him and jumping up and down, and then he died a few days later. And with the relatives, they're often there to guide you and help you through the experience. And with the experience, it's like it's tailor-made for each person. So it's not as if there's an objective meadow or white horse for everyone. It's like consciousness devises a particular experience which will make you feel really happy at a time of immense trauma and change. So, depending on what your bliss is, you find yourself in a situation or a landscape which you really love. So for me it would probably be a sort of a nice grassy meadow by a stream with a big white horse and a blue sky. And the being of light, for some people it's just a being of light, and for other people, depending on your religious upbringing, it will take the form of a particular deity. So if you're a Christian, some Christians identify it as Jesus, and for some Hindus it's Krishna or Shiva. So it's almost like the experience to some degree is tailor-made, and then at a certain point you're having such a wonderful time and you don't want to leave it, and then you're told that it's actually not your time to die yet, and there's more to be done in life, and you're told you have to go back, and the dying person at that point says, I don't want to go back, and they say, I just want to stay here. So often there's quite an argument at that point. And often the dying person is shown things about the future. They're shown children they're going to have in the future, or work they've got to do. So it's like they often have a preview, they have a vision of how the life they've lived, and then they often have a preview of what's coming next. And so at a certain point they're told, I'm sorry, it's not yet your time, and then normally they find themselves back in their bodies, so they suddenly wake up and they're in the hospital and everyone's sort of breathing a sigh of relief and saying, we thought we'd lost you. And when people come back again, it's like they have a complete reorientation of life. So often people who have been really high-powered businessmen, suddenly they're no longer interested in making tons of money, and they retrain as counsellors or healers. Because the two main things that people come back with, and this is pretty universal, they're told that one thing is about gaining knowledge, and the other thing is it's all about love. So it's all about having love for your fellow men, that same unconditional love that the being of light had for them in the near-death experience. And often people come back and they've got powers which they didn't have before. So some people have psychic abilities, or they have abilities where they can no longer, any mechanical device they have immediately breaks down, or watches stop, or they can't go on a computer anymore, or they have real problems with electrical things or malfunction. So it's like they gain something which they hadn't had before, and they realise how immensely precious life is. That's sort of it in a nutshell, what happens. Just thinking if I've forgotten any major parts of it.
I heard some people, I know at least of two people, one person they died, one person died 3 times, and then all 3 times he said he came back and didn't see anything there. I don't know what can be, and the other person I know of, he as well, he experienced death and came back and would be very skeptical and saying nothing there. It was very.
Did he experience anything, or was he just unconscious?
It's actually heart stopped.
Yeah.
Both of them, they had heart stopped.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah. There's only a certain percentage of people who have an NDE during a cardiac arrest. I can't remember what the percentage is. So some people come back from a cardiac arrest with absolutely no experience at all. And my sort of feeling about it is death is very sort of similar to life, really. So in your life drama, it's devised as a movie for you to experience exactly what you're meant to experience, and all these different things happen to you. So in their case, it wasn't part of their particular movie to have a near-death experience, but for other people it is part of, because it completely changes their future life. And in some of the near-death experiences, it's like they experience themselves as a spectrum, so it's very much like this. And when you initially, they find themselves out of their body, then it's like they're separate, they're a separate individual, but they're no longer confined within here. And then it's like there's a spectrum where they go deeper, and it's almost like you become one with the being of light. So you see, the being of light isn't something separate, it's your own deeper self. And as they go deeper into that, it's like the whole universe exists within them. And then it's like they go back out again, and then they're a separate individual, and the whole universe is separate. So in a lot of cases, the near-death state is described as like this spectrum of consciousness, where you are the one consciousness at your deepest level, and you're also a separate individual in the drama of life. So it's like the whole thing exists simultaneously, and it's lovely the way they describe it.
It's interesting that you say that. As my father was getting closer towards death, he didn't have a near death, he just was going that way and continued that way. He started to see and hear and know things that couldn't be explained in any other way except for the fact that he was expanding, so he was clearly going in one direction, but as he was seeing and hearing and knowing things that could not be explained. He was a scientist his entire life, so he was completely the polar opposite to what he was his entire life. All of a sudden, oh my good God, and spirits and things, and it was quite incredible.
Very interesting, that. I had it with when my mother died, and it was very unexpected, and I was full of grief with my brother and sister. And the night before her funeral, we had her coffin was in the church, because we had the first funeral the next morning. So we went and meditated by her coffin. And at the end of a half hour, the last 5 minutes, I just became so happy. And then the happiness lasted all through the night and all through the next day. So in the funeral, I was in a complete bliss state, which was a bit puzzling. It felt like a gift at that point. Because normally you're pretty grief-stricken at your mother's funeral. But I was just in this total bliss state. So it felt like a gift from her. I wanted to play you a very short NDE experience, but I don't want to keep you too long. So you might all just want to go home to bed.
Did you have a near-death experience?
Sorry?
You've had a near-death experience?
I've had a near-death experience when I was very ill. And there was no out-of-body, but I went into this incredibly... it was just incredibly still and peaceful and lovely. I didn't want to leave it. So it's like, I was trying to describe it to Helen was there.
Music, you heard music.
I heard music, and it was so lovely, I just didn't want to leave it. I thought, I'm really happy. And then I came back out of it, and I wasn't so happy.
I'm just going to share an experience with my grandfather, actually. Went in for an operation back in the 50s, and my mother had taken him to the hospital, and he had to have a blood transfusion. They didn't have blood that matched, and he passed away. And back in the days, my mum was born in Uganda, but the operation was happening in Kenya. So she travelled across with her father, my grandfather. So she sent a telegram home to say he's passed away. She was crying, and she kept telling the doctor, he's alive, he's alive. She's very spiritual, very connected like that. And about 5 hours later, the doctor, said, right, I'm going to take you downstairs. I'm going to show you. He's not alive. He's passed away. You're in shock. We've done the telegram. It's gone home. And they pulled the drawer out, and my grandfather came alive. Well, his eyelids opened, and my mum said to the doctor, I'm not crazy. See, I was telling you I had this. And then they had to send another telegram home to say, we're on our way. Basically, there's been a mix-up. And he lived for another 3 years. He died at the same hospital, going through the same operation under the same cause again. Again, the blood didn't match. But when he got home, he said to the family that I met everybody. I met my mum, I met the family, and everybody's well. And my mum said he became he was always calm and peaceful anyway, but he became more towards giving and serving, and that was their experience.
That's a lovely story. I like what he came back with, because often people, when they come back, it's like they never lose that inner illumination. So in the experience of a being of light, you get this amazing happiness, and then you come back and it's still there, so it stays there.
How long is the video that you want to play?
It's 12 minutes. You don't have to watch it. Do you want to watch it?
Please, yeah.
It was just one. I watched a hell of a lot of them. I just picked this one if it works, because I thought he got the whole caboodle where he gets the whole of this. If it's working, I'll leave it aside. There we go. There's nothing to see, so you can just listen to it. You've got the controls down there.
In 2009, the International Association for Near-Death Studies had its annual conference in San Diego, California. After interviewing several near-death experiencers, I found that if you listen to their accounts with an open mind and heart, it just might change your life.
My name is Jim McCartney, and I'm at the IANS Conference 2009 in San Diego. And I'd like to talk about a near-death experience that I had in 1997. This experience was the most profound event of my entire life. And I'm now over a decade away from that experience and still integrating and still unable to understand what actually occurred, or some of the elements that occurred. What happened was I was in bed, and a particle from an artificial valve or something triggered a grand mal seizure. The doctors aren't quite sure. I was dead, or nearly dead, in a gasp, in death throes for about 20 minutes. As my wife desperately tried to bring in help, and I spontaneously came out of it. She experienced horror. I experienced the most fantastic event of my life and the most real event of my life. What happened was an extensive NDE, what they call a near-death experience. I will talk just about a little bit of it because it would take too long for this. What happened was, initially, I found myself suspended, and in a place where there wasn't a place. It was just, I felt the presence of my body and a grayness, or just suspension and nothing. And as I wondered about what was around me, I saw in front of me start to envelop this light that coalesced. Couldn't tell the distance to the light, but it coalesced as a ball. And I marveled at this ball because it was infinite. And it seemed to be the presence I was suspended in that actually took form in front of me. And I spent some time just gaping at this because there was nothing around this ball. This ball contained the universe. Somehow I knew that. And there was nothing, no dimensions, no time, no space, no thing. And it was not something my mind could wrap itself around. And I recognized in retrospect it had to take the form of the ball for me to discern it. The mind can only operate with distinction, what is and what is not. And so it made that distinction for me. And as I continued to marvel at this and wonder what was happening to me, I started drawing towards this light that had such presence and such love to it. And as I started moving towards it, or it moving towards me, there was no reference point to understand who was doing what. I had what many people have called a kind of a life review, and the review for me were events in my life that really defined who Jim was, who I feel my sense of self is, my sense of self-esteem and identity. And most of them were around places I've struggled and been stuck with. And as I experienced an event, it seemed to resolve in my mind and would disappear, and another event would emerge. And with each disappearance, the light got brighter and brighter and brighter. And eventually, I began to feel as if I was actually on the edge and then being enveloped by the light. And I felt my legs filling with this light, this presence, this love, this infinite unity, acceptance, absolutely no judgments. All the judgments I had entertained in the life review were mine. And as I let them go, I actually was able to release closer and closer to this light. And as I began to move into the light, as I say, the light filled my legs, it started filling my arms, and I began to feel as if I was just dissolving into this infinite presence, this infinite love that was drawing me. But I stopped, and I stopped because if I allowed myself to go further, I would lose the sense of self, and I would lose the capacity for choice, to choose to be part of the light or not. Who Jim was would disappear. And so that scared me. What would happen once I lost that ability to be separate? So I withdrew and felt my body become more solid. Again, there was no other events or experiences I had. It was a very timeless feeling to it. And the light was compelling. I mean, it was just, it embodied everything in the universe. And so I drew again in towards the light, and then withdrew. And then it played on this boundary for what seemed like hours. And the furthest I went was to the point where I lost contact with my body. My body seemed to become the light, and all I had left was really my choice, my own volition of Jim and the light. There was a separation in consciousness that I knew in reality was one. But that I still, I never went beyond to lose the ability of my volitional choices. I don't know what would happen. So eventually I just withdrew, and without my choice and without me realizing that I had made any kind of a significant change, I was just kind of wondering what would happen. The light began to fade, and metaphorically I turned around and looked at this world again. I saw the world that I had momentarily left. And it looked like so much paper mache. It looked like two-dimensional fluff. That this was the illusion, and it was all contained within this infinite presence. And as it became more and more solid, I recognized that within 3 weeks, the experience, the intensity of the knowingness and the experience that I was immersed in would be lost. That there was no way my my phenomenal mind could contain that. And as you can tell, I'm grasping for words to try to describe what I was actually experiencing. And another awareness came to as well, is that the phenomenal world is part of a larger, not part of a larger whole. It is the infinite. It's the infinite in form. It's the fracturing of the infinite into the myriad creations of this universe. And yet it's all one. And to have a phenomenal world, for me to be talking to you, requires separation. It requires me, you, separation in time, two entities. My ability to choose, while in the presence of this light, required, again, that separation. Reality, there is no separation. But in the illusion we've created here, in this phenomenal world that we play in, requires it. It's not that it's paper mache and less than, it's just that it's required to be at this level for us to experience this level of life. What I see in people that go through deep crisis or have near-death experiences, they seem to integrate a larger aspect of themselves. They are unafraid of death, as I am. I am afraid of dying, but my body would resist that greatly. But I know, and I emphatically know, that I am not this finite body here. This is something that I have. I've returned, and my mission in the world is to communicate what I know as best I can to others.
Jim, you had an experience of the light, and so many near-death experiencers have that experience. So I'd like to ask you, what was the light to you? How would you describe the light to someone who has never seen it?
We only have our 3D beliefs here to try to understand this, something that's not contained within it. And there is no way I can find words to describe the light. The nearest would be, it was infinite. It encompasses everything. It's the source of everything. And it's not a thing itself. The light was light, as I stated, in a finite form for me to perceive it. And yet it's what we're immersed in. The effects of this experience was recognizing that who I am is the universe in form. And it's done a couple of things. One is shake my own sense of self from this egoic physical structure that's trying to survive the best it knows how through, a dangerous world, to seeing this incredible matrix and dance of life that this body is part of, and yet that dance of all of life is part of me as well. There's no separation. One of the outcomes of that is that my deep desire is to help others, to serve. This is a very, very common element you see in people going through extreme trauma or near-death experiences, is that they pop out the other side and say, wow, let's go play, let's go help. It's not about my bank account or the size of my house. It's about all of us waking up to more than what we see on the planet right now.
Yeah, it was quite succinct.
Thank you very much for that. It was really interesting.
Good. Right, we'll go home now.
Thank you, that was great.
Thank you. More next
I
week.
would like it to post it on Facebook.
It's on my Philosophy of the Cosmic Dance group.
Okay.
It's in there.
Because maybe in some like when you put in Facebook after there is a very nice like the testimony of Anita.
Anita Mangiani.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a short talk from death,
Yeah.
and she's explaining her experience, and it's very similar.
It's similar. I know her experience.
Yes, very beautiful.
Next,
When you place it in, that interview.
I don't think I played you Anita Mangiani. She's written a book as well. Next week it's the title is Who Dances?
The light.
The Light. Who Dances? But Miranda.
Oh yes. Who's asking?
Who's asking? Who wants to know? That's what big villains say. Who wants to know?
Sorry, one quick question. When you're doing the macabre, sometimes, do you ever feel the presence of spirits? Or
Definitely, most definitely.
Yes.
Helen answer that. When they've just died, it's amazing. It's hard to describe. It's like something sweeps in. I think it's a power of the ritual somehow. It's almost like that centre line is a place where everything walks somehow.
Mr. Razui walks that line as well. I feel him very strongly, don't you?
Yeah. It's difficult to explain, but it's almost like, for me, the macabrely is like a window into the other world. Thank you.
Yeah, he talks on suicide. People, yeah, anything related to that.
Mostly suicide.
Kelly Sammy.
Kelly Sammy. There's a great lady called Kelly Sammy who's committed suicide and then came back, and she came back completely illuminated.
Okay.
So the experience is similar.
You asking me?
The experience is similar. I'm saying it is. The experience, the after-death experience in most suicides is more or less the same.
People who have committed suicide, you mean?
Attempted it.
Attempted
and
it.
failed.
Oh, okay, and failed.
Yeah.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah.